$1 million for charity. Julian thought, eyes fixed on the chandelier above. While my only child has been missing for 96 hours and 14 minutes. The champagne glass in his hand was warming, not from the room's temperature but from his own palm, damp with sweat and trembling slightly, as if his body remembered what his mind was trying to forget. On stage at the gala at the Met, he was the embodiment of success, a proud icon of New York's elite. His jet-black tuxedo was hand-tailored to fit him flawlessly. The MC's voice rang out through a crystal microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please raise your glasses for the man who has donated over $100 million to children's education in the past year, Mr. Julian Vance. The entire ballroom rose to its feet. Applause thundered. Smiles lit the room. Admiration sparkled. They didn't know. No one did. No one was supposed to. Only Richard, his closest friend of 25 years, knew that Amelia had disappeared 4 nights ago. Richard had said silence is the only way to protect her. But who exactly was this silence protecting Julian, stepped off the stage and left the untouched champagne on the tray of a passing server? No one noticed. He walked straight out, like a man fleeing the scene. The glittering lights of the gala vanished behind glass doors, replaced by the biting night air and the acrid scent of burning fuel. New York at night felt damp like a sorrow unnamed. Wind whipped down Fifth Avenue, lashing at his silk collar. A fine drizzle fell, not enough to soak through, but enough to settle in the bones of a father quietly breaking apart. He wandered with no destination, no driver, no assistant, no bodyguard. Just the steady sound of his leather soles echoing on granite pavement. I built an empire, but I couldn't keep a little girl safe in my arms. He hated that he still remembered exactly how Amelia's laugh echoed through the living room 4 days ago, and hated himself more for not remembering the last time she'd curled up in his lap. Headlights flared through traffic, and then he saw it. A boy small, wearing a grimy gray hoodie, weaved between red light-stopped cars on Park Avenue, holding up a box of cheap chocolates to each window. Kids selling candy weren't unusual in Manhattan, but what hung around this boy's neck made Julian freeze. The necklace, the North Star. A custom design that his late wife had commissioned the night Amelia was born. A simple 5-point star encrusted with tiny diamonds shaped into Cassiopeia. On the back, it was engraved with 2 words for A. One of a kind, impossible to confuse. Amelia never took it off. So why? Julian lunged off the curb like a man torn from reality. "Hey, stop!" His voice wasn't angry, it was pleading, desperate, frantic. The boy hesitated for a second, then bolted like lightning. The chase burst into motion, rain and red lights flickering above them. Julian stumbled after him for blocks, gasping, never letting the necklace out of his sight, glimpses of it flashing beneath the boy's collar. They darted down a side alley, thick with the stench of urine, rotting trash, and discarded needles. Finally, Julian caught up, grabbing the boy's shoulder and pinning him against a peeling brick wall. "Please," Julian gasped, breath ragged. "That necklace, it belongs to my daughter." The boy struggled for a moment, then stopped. Not out of fear, but something else in Julian's eyes. Maybe panic. Maybe something emptier. "I didn't steal it," the boy said, voice small but firm. "The girl gave it to me." Julian held his breath. "She told me to tell her dad. The North Star will lead him home." His heart clenched. She also mentioned someone named Uncle Rick. Uncle Rick, 2 words. But they hit like a blade, straight to the spine. Julian let go of the boy's shoulder. The air fled his lungs. A wave of dizziness crashed over him, the kind he'd felt when he got the call that his wife hadn't survived the C-section. Only this time, It was colder, and still alive. Richard Sterling, best friend of 25 years. The man who'd held his shoulder the night Amelia went missing. The man who had said, "You have to stay strong. We'll find her." Now from the mouth of a street kid, that same name rang out like a death sentence for every ounce of trust Julian had ever held. His knees gave out. He sank to the wet cement, uncaring of the price of his bespoke suit. Rain fell harder now, mixing with sweat tears, and the scream clawing through his mind. The boy stayed still, watching. And there, in a nameless alley under the New York rain, one of the most powerful billionaires in America began to unravel, not because of lost money, lost companies, or lost reputation, but because, for the first time in his life, he no longer knew who to trust. The subway car vibrated gently as it curved around a bend. Julian Vance sat still on the gray plastic bench, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. His hair was matted from rain. His tailored pants were streaked with grime. The man once hailed by Forbes as the golden mind of Manhattan now looked more like a lost old man than a billionaire. Across from him, Leo stared intently at the subway door window. Not to admire the view, to monitor. He always monitored. Space, sounds, strangers' glances. Everything was a potential threat. The train jolted. A drunken man mumbled something before toppling over at the end of the car. Julian flinched. Leo didn't. He didn't even look. Far end right side. That shadow's not someone sleeping. Leo's voice was barely above a breath, eyes never leaving the glass. Julian glanced over. A man sat, hunched hands tucked inside his coat. Julian's heart slowed. No danger, just a homeless man holding on to the last warmth he owned. When did you learn to read everything like that? Leo shrugged. Since I learned how to sleep without dying. When the train stopped at Grand Concourse, Julian followed Leo like a man drifting through fog. Late-night Bronx was a different planet from the Upper East Side. No polished glass, no smiling concierges, no hallway orchids. Just the smell of damp decay, wind slicing through wall cracks and stairwell fractures like a city's broken lifeline. Leo led him past an abandoned playground where a snapped swing hung in midair, waiting for someone to return. Then up into a battered building door, kicked off its hinges, mildew rising with every step. Third floor, unit 3C. Leo pulled a tiny key from his shoelace. Inside was barely a shelter. A thin mattress, some milk cartons, an old desk lamp, and cardboard stacked as windbreakers. On the table sat a handmade rag doll, stitches from old t-shirts, hair made of shoelaces. Julian froze. He recognized it. Amelia had once stuffed that fabric into Leo's hand and said, "This is my hero, even if no one sees him." He dropped onto the creaking wood floor. Eyes locked on the doll. Is she still alive?" His voice rasped. Leo gave a small nod. "I don't know where anymore, but I know she's scared. She said, Uncle Rick said it was just a game, but she doesn't want to play anymore." A vein pulsed hard at Julian's temple. He didn't scream. He didn't smash anything. His anger had cooled into something sharper. Cold fury, like a blade forged in ice. Richard, the man who walked Amelia to her first day of school. The man who drank with him the night his wife died. The man who had always been there not because Julian needed him, but because he trusted him. And maybe that was the perfect trap. "Do you have any address? Anywhere he might have taken her?" Leo shook his head. "Only a description. It was dark, but she said it smelled like rotting wood, and echoes loud ones like a cave. She said the ceiling was high, and there were thick velvet curtains. Torn." Julian stood, eyes flaring in the dim room. "Old theater," he whispered. "Abandoned ones. Leo looked up. They met eyes. A single nod. They found Amelia 6 hours later in a crumbling opera house near River Avenue, once a grand venue before a bankruptcy suit shuttered it in 2009. Amelia lay on an old mattress beneath the stage. Light trickled through a hole in the ceiling, casting a faint glow on her pale cheek. Her arms clutched a doll, one leg missing. Julian dropped to his knees, pressing his hand to her forehead. She was burning up, but her eyes widened when she saw him. "Dad, you found me." Her voice rasped. "I'm here. I'm right here," he choked. She whispered something. Julian leaned in. Uncle Rick said, "You'd have to kneel and beg." She looked into his eyes. He laughed. "Dad said Mom would be so disappointed in you." Julian lifted her into his arms. Each step was a silent vow. He didn't scream. He didn't weep. He walked off the stage like a god who no longer believed in men. Leo walked beside him. No one said a word. They didn't call 911. They returned to the tiny apartment. Leo warmed milk. Julian wiped Amelia down, dressed her in children's clothes Leo had gathered from donation bins. She fell asleep on the thin mattress. Julian sat watching her breathe. Then he stood, picked up his phone, dialed a number. A woman's voice answered, crisp and clear. Rossi speaking. Julian didn't introduce himself. He said one sentence, "I need your help to hunt a demon." Isabella Rossi arrived 2 hours later with a laptop, 2-burner SIM cards, and eyes like lasers. She looked at Julian. No pleasantries, no fake sympathy. She went straight to the point. "If we want to strike his heart, we go after what he loves most." "Money?" Julian asked. "No," she replied firmly. "Reputation." A single nod. An alliance signed in pain, intellect, and rage. Julian canceled every meeting that week, turned off every phone. Let Richard believe he was breaking down. He relocated to a small apartment in Queens arranged by Isabella, where the walls were half-painted, the floors worn, but there were no bugs, no hidden cameras. And there, under the cold light of a naked ceiling bulb, Julian began his transformation into a ghost. Not to hide, but to hunt. Autumn winds lashed cold through the alleys of Queens, but inside the fourth-floor apartment, where Julian Vance was hiding, a different kind of storm was forming, not in the sky, but inside his chest. The pale glow of the laptop bathed Julian's hollow face in blue. His eyes burned into the streams of data wire transfers, shell companies' IP addresses, transaction encryptions. 12 hours straight. No breaks, no food, no movement. Behind him, Isabella Rossi leaned against the window frame, holding a cup of cold coffee, eyes fixed on him. "You're not sleeping. I'm tracing blood, and men like Richard bleed in numbers." The digital battlefield had opened. Julian, the tech prodigy who once built one of the world's most advanced AI platforms, was now using those very skills to dismantle the man he once trusted most. Isabella was more than a lawyer. She was a strategist. She didn't just want Richard to fall. She wanted him to crash into the deepest pit with no safety net. "We need something undeniable," she said. "No speculation, no theory, just raw, irrefutable truth." Meanwhile, the ground-level operation moved like a finely tuned machine. Leo, the invisible boy, had become their eyes and ears. No one questioned a kid selling candy. No one paid attention to him loitering near luxury parking lots where suited men climbed out of black cars. No one noticed the cheap phone in his hand, which was actually a recording device, a camera, and a GPS tracker. At a cafe near Union Square, Leo quietly wiped tables. Richard Sterling sat 2 aisles away, whispering to a man in a crisp white shirt with a Rolex glinting on his wrist. Leo couldn't hear it all, but he caught 2 words, election and transfer. 3 days later, Julian slammed his hand on the table. Got it. He slipped. Isabella turned from the investigation board. What is it? Julian spun the laptop around. A web of shell corporations appeared, the network Richard used to siphon funds from the company. But one stood out. It was running on a private server. An old server. One Julian had personally gifted Richard in 2012, labeled for family use only. Julian still had root access. He smiled. Not with relief, but with something that hadn't surfaced since Amelia went missing, the edge of clarity. We don't have to break in. We just walk through the front door and take everything inside. That night, they tore through the encrypted files on the server. Documents, financial trails, payee names, emails, calendar logs, and then a folder named Archangel, heavily encrypted. It took Julian 4 hours to crack. Inside, a series of audio files, images, presentations, and a single coded email sent from Richard Sterling to a contact under the alias Governor 7. The message was short and chilling. Vance will collapse completely. Once he breaks, we release the rescue video. The media will explode, and then his legacy will be ours. Timestamp 1 day before Amelia went missing. Julian pushed his chair back, stood in silence. Isabella skimmed the files. Her eyes narrowed. She looked up to see Julian's fists clenched so tight the knuckles had gone white. We have what we need. Not yet, Julian rasped. I need him to feel even safer. Richard still called, every day. His voice danced between concern and sympathy. Julian, I just spoke to the chief. Sounds like there's a new lead. I know this is hard, but you've got to take care of yourself. You're a great father, Julian. Don't blame yourself anymore. Each word sliced like a knife. But Julian didn't bleed. He played the part of a father, unraveling slowly, helplessly, hopelessly. I don't know anymore, Rick. Maybe you're right. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Richard swallowed the act whole. He believed it. He was triumphant. Leo stood near the desk, fiddling with a torn scrap of paper. What are you going to do next? Julian looked at him. For the first time, he placed both hands on the boy's shoulders, not as a rescuer, but as an ally. We're going to throw a gala, he said. A big one. Where everyone thinks they're the center of the room. Then what Leo asked, eyes glowing. Julian leaned in, whispered, then we pull the curtain and let them see the devil standing in the middle. That night, Isabella sent an anonymous email to several top investigative journalists in New York. Subject line, the fall of a friend. Attachments, a copy of the damning email, the money laundering diagram, and a cryptic tip something big was going to happen at the upcoming Entrepreneur of the Year Gala at Cipriani Wall Street. Back in the small apartment, Leo dozed off on the couch, head resting on an advanced physics book Julian had bought him the first time anyone believed he deserved to be smart. Julian watched him sleep. The darkness outside only made the light inside him burn brighter. He had once been a cold CEO, a father who always chose work over play. But now he was something else. A father shedding his armor of success. A man relearning how to trust. And this time he placed his faith in a child with nothing except honesty. Cipriani Wall Street gleamed like a marble lighthouse piercing the Manhattan night. The Entrepreneur of the Year Gala is a gathering of power symbols, industry titans, and media elites. Champagne glasses clinked on silver trays. Gowns and tuxedos swept across the lobby like moving silk. Violins played from the corner, elegant and smooth like the promises that never meant anything. Behind the stage, golden letters blazed against deep navy velvet, honoring legacy, celebrating integrity. Amid that glittering sea of influence, no one noticed the young server pushing a cart of champagne, eyes still as glass. Leo. Beneath his crisp white shirt, a miniature microphone was hidden in his lapel. In his ear, an almost invisible earpiece connected directly to Isabella Rossi on the mezzanine. "Sound check," she whispered. Loud and clear, Leo replied. "Start moving. Head toward the main table." Across the room, Julian Vance sat at a side table in a charcoal suit that had seen better days. His tie-loose beard unshaven. He looked like a guest who didn't belong in the very world he once ruled. No one recognized him. No one cared. Perfect. On stage, Richard Sterling stood next to the MC, face gleaming with pride, teeth blinding under the lights. He shook hands with the air of a man convinced glory was his birthright. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host beamed. "Please join me in congratulating Mr. Richard Sterling, this year's outstanding entrepreneur, for his tireless contributions to technology and community." Thunderous applause. Flashes fired like fireworks. Leo halted behind the stage near the AV booth. He tapped a small device in his pocket. A signal was sent. Above, Isabella gave a subtle nod. She signaled the technician beside her, one temporarily borrowed from the FBI. The screen behind Richard flickered. The lights shifted. The event logo faded. And in its place appeared the face of Amelia Vance, sitting in a hospital room, holding her doll eyes locked on the camera. The entire ballroom gasped. Air fled the room. Amelia began to speak. Her voice was soft, but clear. "Uncle Rick said, my dad didn't deserve me, that this was a game, and Dad had to kneel and beg." Her words echoed through the gilded chamber, into the ears of those who once dined with Richard, into the hearts of donors who had once cheered him. On stage, Richard turned chalk white. He stammered, forced a smile, tried to say something, but no one heard. "There must be some sound issue, I'm not sure." But the next clip rolled, not from Amelia, from Leo, clicking. Laughter. Then Richard's voice, taken from a conversation he never knew was recorded. "That idiot let him fall. Once he hits bottom, we'll be the heroes. The public loves a redemption story. He's lived up high all his life. Time he learned how to crawl." Whispers rippled across the room. Eyes turned toward Richard no longer with admiration, but revulsion. And then Julian rose from his table. The spotlight turned as if justice itself flipped the switch. He walked slowly down the aisle past those who once shook Richard's hand, who once called Julian a forgotten legend. On stage, Richard froze. Julian looked at him. No rage, no tears, just a chilling calm. "I used to believe legacy was built on wealth, power, and brilliance, but it's not. True legacy is what remains when all those things are stripped away and only how you treat the powerless is left behind." Richard opened his mouth. No sound came out. A voice rang from the wings, "Richard Sterling. You're under arrest." Isabella stepped out, followed by 2 FBI agents in black suits. The entire ballroom fell silent. There was no shouting, no chaos. Just truth laid bare, and the eyes of an elite audience turning away from the man they once praised. Richard turned and saw Leo. The boy didn't speak. He just stood there, small, still, like a mirror reflecting every sin back at its source. Below there was no applause, only silence. The silence of justice being served. The silence of the powerful realizing they too could be judged. In the service hallway, as Richard was escorted down the corridor, he turned one last time. Julian didn't look at him. Instead, he turned toward Leo, waiting beside Isabella outside the control booth. Julian placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, gently, without a word. Because in that moment they both understood monsters don't fear the dark. They fear the light. And tonight, that light had struck them right in the heart. 1 year later, New York was still loud, relentless, exhaling steam through manhole covers and the glassy eyes of its high-rises. But atop a small building tucked away on Madison Avenue, another world existed. No noise, no show. Just morning light, the scent of toasted bread, and laughter ringing from the living room. Amelia spun in circles on the wooden floor, her doll-like dress fluttering like petals. Leo sat at the table, forehead resting on a math workbook, his brows furrowed, pencil clenched between fingers like he might snap it. "X isn't your enemy," Julian said, resting a hand on the back of Leo's chair, offering him a mug of cocoa. "It's just a secret waiting for you to unlock." Leo looked up, the same guarded, quiet gaze from a year ago, but now with something new in it, trust. Their new penthouse wasn't the most luxurious place Julian had ever owned, but it was the only one that had a framed photo of 3 people hanging in the center of the living room. Julian, Leo, and Amelia smiling under sunlight, the roof of their home behind them. No bodyguards, no partners, no masks. Beneath the photo hung a small brass plaque that read, "Family isn't born, it's found." The Richard Sterling case had ended in multiple prison sentences, not just for him, but for politicians, accountants, and co-conspirators who once treated justice like a bargaining chip. A portion of the seized assets had been redirected into the North Star Foundation, a new organization Julian founded. Its mission was simple: find those forgotten by the world. Give them a chance to never be forgotten again. One morning, at the Foundation's office, Isabella Rossi stepped into the conference room holding a file. She wore a white blouse and flats, looking no different from the day Julian had first met her, except her eyes now held a softness that hadn't been there before. "There's a boy in Queens. Expelled for hitting someone to protect his sister. Smart, but no one's noticed. I think Leo should meet him." Leo, now the youngest member of the Foundation's advisory board, nodded without hesitation. "I'll go. Sometimes to bring someone into the light, you have to pull the curtain yourself." Julian looked up from a stack of documents and smiled. "You're starting to sound like a lawyer." "I live with one," Leo said, smirking toward Isabella. "And an old man obsessed with metaphors," he added, pointing at Julian. They all laughed, not the polite chuckle of corporate events, but real laughter, the kind that sounds like children giggling on a cold night, warm, brief, but lasting. Amelia had made a full recovery. She still kept the rag doll Leo had made for her, now stitched with a new leg patched from one of Julian's old shirts. Every night before bed, she placed it on her nightstand, right beside the necklace with the North Star. "Do you remember," Julian asked one night, as they sat under the skylight watching stars. "Yes," Amelia nodded. "What did you tell Leo when you gave him that necklace?" She tilted her head, eyes twinkling. "I said, if my dad ever got lost, give him this, because he'd always recognize the light from his daughter." Julian turned away. Not to hide tears, but so she wouldn't see him crying. Out of joy. A week later, the North Star Foundation held its first ceremony honoring the Silent Guide's students, immigrants, reformed ex-convicts those society once turned its back on. Julian didn't stand on stage. He stood in the audience among parents, among strangers who had no idea who he once was, and that made him feel freer than any keynote speech ever could. Isabella gave the opening remarks. Leo presented the awards, Amelia front row clapping the loudest. That evening on the rooftop, the 3 of them watched the New York night sky. The city still raged below, but above them, stillness, clarity. Amelia pointed at a tiny glowing dot. "That star, that's the North Star, right?" Julian nodded. "Yes. And it's always there even when you can't see it. Even when the clouds cover it, it's still there. Just like..." He paused. Leo finished the sentence. "Just like hope." They all looked up. No one spoke again. They didn't need to. Julian stood quietly between the two children's eyes fixed on the sky, where the North Star twinkled small, yet unwavering. And in that moment, he realized something heartbreakingly simple. Richard had tried to take everything from him. And in a way, he had. He had taken the old version of Julian, the isolated CEO obsessed with control and reputation. But in return, he'd left behind something far more valuable. A son who'd never had a name. A daughter Julian thought he'd lost. And a reason to keep living not for himself, but for the generation ahead. Julian smiled, no bitterness, no regret, only peace. Because now he knew legacy isn't about what we own. It's about the direction we leave behind for others to follow. Like the North Star. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Toch Story so you don't miss more journeys filled with hope, humanity, and healing. Because every person deserves to be seen.